What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp, Fightful.com, here with a name you know, Taylor Wilde. How you doing?
Oh, I'm so great. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. I mean, lots of stuff to ask you, but I'm going to go ahead and get the question out that everybody, you're probably being asked every interview. How have you been? What have you been doing since your wrestling career ended?
I'm really good. I've been incredibly busy. I've been retired almost 10 years. In that time, I finished my BA in psychology. I then went to a technical college. I got a diploma in firefighting and a bunch of emergency certificates, essentially. I got hired full-time as a firefighter in Toronto, where I live. I got married. I had a beautiful baby boy. And now I've started a podcast, and I'm inching towards maybe coming out of retirement if this COVID ever allows so.
So yeah, you mentioned the podcast. I've actually heard about it via a friend, the Wilde On podcast, and you mentioned retirement for the last 10 years, but the future seems pretty open. First off, what motivated you to do the podcast?
Well, truth be told, I had decided to go back to wrestling the end of March. I was going to go back for an Impact date in Canada. I was ready to, start the Taylor Wilde 2.0 career. And then Corona happened and has obviously changed the face of the world as we know it. I'm Canadian. The borders are to some degree closed unless you're an essential worker. I need paperwork. Professional wrestlers aren't high up there on work visas. So I've always thought of doing this, and it just seemed like the right time. So, and especially because, a lot more people are home or, living a lower key life, they're more interested in things like podcasts. So it's a platform that I hadn't utilized before, and I'm really excited about.
Yeah, our parent company is based out of Toronto, so we go up there once a year, and we unfortunately don't get to this year because of everything that's going on. But you had mentioned the Impact date that was set. I assume that had something to do with the TNA versus Impact storyline that they have going, and the subsequent pay-per-view that they had set.
Yeah, like I said, it was for the Windsor date. There was a few things surrounding it that made sense for it to be, a Canadian date since I live in Toronto. I think there was some talk about the TNA versus Impact, but again, it literally was happening as the world was changing. So there wasn't anything concrete, and I'm not sharing, but yeah, just things were changing so quickly.
So did Impact seem open in working with you in the future if you were to come back, even though that date didn't work out?
If I was a betting woman, I would say yes.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So you left 9 years ago, and you left in your, what were you, 24, 25?
25, yep.
God. I mean, we would see a lot of women in WWE leave around 29, 30, 31 then. Not so much these days. The longevity is there a lot more now. And you're still, you're like, what, 33, 34 now?
34, yeah.
So you would have a full career ahead of you even because you got started so early. I mean, the emotions and the thoughts you said you've thought about it for a long time. How long?
On and off. Probably, I would say, oh, excuse me, I've got an alarm going off. Sorry, I hope that didn't meddle with the recording. For the past 2 years, since my son was born, I think it was one of the, subconscious motivations to get back in shape after having a child. I'd say for a good 5 years, I was completely checked out. Like, I wasn't watching wrestling. I wasn't really talking to too many of my friends, not because I don't love them, just, I'm an all or nothing kind of person. I was out of it. I was changing gears. I wanted to start a career in firefighting. I wanted to start a family. So it was, and I needed the time away. I needed like a very concrete finish. to recuperate and recover. Like, I did retire at 25, but I had been at it since just before my 19th birthday. Yeah. Like, I had a decent run, and I was very busy for all of that time. So it was an extremely young retirement, but I was pretty sore at the end of it too. Like, my body really needed it, and for my morale, where I was in my life, the uncertainty that wrestling was at that time. You weren't salaried. There's not like a benefits package or pension or anything like that. And for better or worse, I'm always a forward-thinking person, and I'm very goal-oriented, and it was too uncertain at that time. I was very sore. I was mentally burnt out. So at that time, it made sense. And I don't regret it at all.
Has the ascension of women's wrestling in the mainstream helped contribute to that decision? We've seen people like Becky Lynch main event WrestleMania. I don't know how much you keep up with pro wrestling these days, but did that have anything to do with the decision, or was it strictly a personal one?
Both. Oh my God, we are in such an exciting time again for women's wrestling. I feel when I was with TNA, wrestling, like anything in popular culture, goes in waves. And when I was part of the Knockouts division, it was a really exciting time. Like, there was characters, there was so much diversity, the storylines were rich and had so much substance. There were sometimes 2 women's matches, multiple vignettes, and the focus, not primarily, but there was a large focus on the Knockouts. And then we went through a lull and a change, and, when I was off, I wasn't as focused, but nothing was drawing me back in to watch. But now I feel like Impact is doing something very similar. They've taken a lot of their own young, homegrown talent and have built on them. And the women's division, again, it's full, it's diverse. Storylines are very interesting. Same thing with WWE. Like, I'm so proud of Becky Lynch and Natty Neidhart and all the women that I came up with. They're all doing really, really well, and they're doing their own thing. Like, it's a very strong girl power movement going on right now, and it's very exciting, and I absolutely have a huge part of me wanting to be back in it.
Now, when a lot of people think of Toronto and wrestling, they think of Edge, Christian, Bobby Roode, Eric Young. You came up a little bit after them with like a different crop of people. And you mentioned Natty Neidhart and Becky Lynch. There were a lot of women doing a lot of traveling back then, especially, that would cross paths. Who all did you learn from and gain experience from in your travels, so to speak, that ended up becoming major stars?
Oh, goodness. Well, for a long time in the beginning of my career, there was another girl, Tiana Ringer, who I had trained with from essentially day one. So we were wrestling each other a lot locally because, truthfully, I think there was only the 2 of us. And then when Shimmer came about, it was getting bigger and bigger. So there was Natty Neidhart, there was Sarah Stock, there was ODB. Gail Kim was kind of in and out, but she was already on her way to WWE.
Yeah.
Angelina Love. I'm totally going to be missing people here. There was a lot. Nikki Rocks.
So, I mean, there was a great crop of talent to work off of and improve with. Like, I mean, it's weird to think that so many of these women who are still in their early to mid 30s were all competing together 15 years ago. That's a rarity in wrestling.
I agree. I think it's interesting now, people think about like the Attitude Era in WWE when it was very like model based. Everyone was, very blonde and very tanned, and their boobs were pushed really high, and the quality of wrestling isn't what it is today. It was good for a girls' match, you would hear a lot of. Whereas now, the diversity of women, not just in their characters, their bodies, they're more true to themselves. Like, we're seeing a revolution in women's bodies, period. Like, fit is the new thin. And I'm such a big advocate of that because there's been so much focus on being thin and fitting into this box. So with this diversity with women's wrestling, you can have a longer career. You're not just 35 and washed up because you don't look good in spandex anymore. You don't have to just wear a little spandex outfit. You can be like the Havoc, where you're wearing, a full more bodysuit, or you can be like the Awesome Kongs, where you're a big, strong woman, and that is your gimmick. So I think there's this new movement where you can age gracefully in the professional wrestling world and still be successful.
So to kind of keep up with your early career, do I remember right that you had an ROH appearance pretty early on too?
I must have done. Yeah, I think very early on, and forgive me, my memory is not always the greatest because I work shift work. I have a toddler, and I used to hit my head quite regularly. I did. I believe it was right before the very first Shimmer show, so it may have been in Chicago. But yeah, there was a match very early on.
And then you ended up going to WWE and doing developmental stuff. Who spoke to you about that? Who brought you in? Who recruited you, so to speak?
Yeah, for sure. So my trainer, Rob Fuego, he actually came up with Edge and Christian, Rhino, and Johnny Swinger, actually. So those superstars were kind of in and out of my school for the first 2 years, whether they were coming off injury or they were just there to visit my trainer. And I was very, very lucky. They had kind of watched me grow over the past 2 years, and I actually had their stamp of approval when I had sent my promo package to WWE. And the head of talent relations at the time, I believe, was John Laurinaitis, and didn't have much success with him. He wasn't really a big fan of mine. But I kept at it, and then once Tommy Dreamer took over that position, that's when things changed. That's when I was given the opportunity to have the tryout at Deep South Wrestling.
You mentioned Tommy Dreamer having at least a good impression of you. He's still involved in Impact Wrestling now. Was he the one that reached out about this, or was it Scott D'Amore, maybe the Canada connection, or somebody else to bring you back to Impact?
It was kind of a cumulative thing. A few friends I still maintain in the Knockouts locker room, and I had taken my son not that long ago to the show that was in Toronto. Oh. So yeah, there were a few conversations.
So when you left WWE, what were your thoughts then? When were you like, okay, I'm going to keep plugging away? I mean, I'm sure it's not ever an easy thing to leave a company like that, but what was your mindset like?
I was pretty disillusioned. I had some momentum going in developmental, and for a few different reasons, the ideas they had for me just fizzled out, and that was kind of the end of it. So again, I needed a break at that point. I thought, okay, screw it. Maybe this isn't for me. I'll go back to university. I'll finish my degree. And then I think 6 months later, I think, TNA called.
Didn't you do some house shows? I remember reading once, like SmackDown house shows or something against Jamie Noble.
Yeah, I'd done a few dark matches with Jamie. So their idea for me was I was wrestling as a Japanese boy. I wore a double mesh, blacked out, like lucha libre mask, shoulder pads, big kick pads, big baggy Sabu pants. And I was wrestling as a boy named Sendai, hailing from parts unknown Japan. And I was fighting Jamie Noble. And I guess the grand idea was to have me win the intergender title, or the cruiserweight title, excuse me. But whoever was champ at that time wasn't into it and made quite a stink. So even though this was Vince McMahon's, whether it was his idea or not, we had a meeting and he had his stamp of approval on it. And I had some pretty excellent people working with me at the time. Like I said, Jamie Noble and Dean Malenko was very behind it. And, it's a political business, and whoever was champ at that time basically won. And then I was out of a job because there was no more ideas for me. I'd been in developmental for about a year, and it was time to bring in some fresh meat, I guess.
So had you met with Vince McMahon about this idea, or was that just something you had heard down the pipeline?
No, I had a sit down, one-on-one, shake your hand, congratulations meeting.
How did that go? Because I've heard some various things. Like, for example, Kevin Thorne, big dude, told me how intimidated he was to meet Vince McMahon for the first time.
Yeah, very well. You know, too, you're you're so eager to please, and you want to be memorable, and you want to make a good impression. And he's a very intimidating person, but he was, you know, very, very fair. He's obviously, you know, quite a persona, so he gets through to that character. But yeah, it was a very intimidating experience, one I will not forget. I probably blacked out halfway through, so I remember nodding and smiling a lot. But I couldn't really recreate the conversation for you.
So who breaks the news to you that you're not winning the Intercontinental title, the Cruiserweight title after?
Yeah.
I mean, because that's a pretty major thing to be told. Like, hey, you're a woman in developmental in that era, especially. Oh, but we're going to use you on the main roster, and you're going to become Cruiserweight champion.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly how it went, but I was doing house shows for SmackDown pretty regularly. And I can't remember if I was tipped off at my last house show or what was going on, but I remember I was living in Tampa at the time, and I remember driving back from the gym and getting some text messages from some other people in developmental that people were being let go. And I just had this like instant sinking feeling. I was like, I'm next. And that was kind of it. And then I got the phone call, and, you know, they wished me best in all my future endeavors.
Well, you did end up in TNA, and you made an immediate impact there. Was any of that a part of the pitch? Like, hey, you're going to come in and immediately you're going to work with Awesome Kong, and you're going to win the championship, and you're going to be like the key cog.
Not at all. Nope. I actually had no idea what I was walking into. There were so many women hired at that time. I didn't know where I was going to slot in, but I was not upset with how it turned out.
I mean, that's a pretty amazing introduction, because Awesome Kong had been just the woman there. And quite frankly, to a lot of people, the most dominant character in wrestling at that time.
For sure. It was, you know, massive shoes to fill. That was a sink or swim moment, I think. And it was a very exciting storyline. It was very innovative. It was that quintessential David and Goliath, but with female professional wrestlers coming to life. And it was a blast.
And we talk about the women's revolution and the way that women are presented today. That was happening a decade ago with TNA wrestling. Like, to me, in that era, especially around the time Hogan and Bischoff took over, like, throughout that transition, the women were the most integral part of that show. They were what stood out. I couldn't see on WWE programming what I saw on TNA programming by way of women's wrestling. How important was that to you, sticking around, and your happiness then? Was that a level of creative satisfaction that was getting fulfilled?
Absolutely. And at that point, after being with WWE just for a year, but being on the road probably for a good 5 months with the WWE crew, the mentality and morale of everybody at TNA, everyone was pretty darn happy to be there. The crews were happy. The wrestlers were happy. It was much more of a family-like locker room versus everybody in WWE. At that time, it was a different time, but we're talking about different pay scales. We're talking about different levels of status. Everyone is a lot more on edge at WWE, and you're not so quick to be accepted, whereas I think with TNA, everybody was just so happy to be there, and it was homegrown talent. There wasn't a lot of big names that were competing with each other. So they were all creating this product together, and I loved that. And regardless of the salaries that were coming in, being part of this like homegrown product that was gaining massive steam and momentum and everyone was getting along, that was priceless to me. And that's what made me stay. I never looked back at WWE.
And I remember the matches were a little bit shorter, but I remember there being like a 1 month period where you were in like a cage match and a ladder match and then a Monsters Ball match. Though that was not something that was happening in other major promotions at that time. Like in like thumbtack matches and stuff like that. This was unique to you, and also they crammed it in like a month and a half. I feel like you were doing all these crazy matches.
Yeah. No, it was, like I said, it was a very cool time, and it really set the tone for what women's wrestling could be. And I hope I did a good enough job that that had continued, and I assume it has done. But if it hasn't, I'd love to be part of bringing those matches back, because I think women are at a point now where they're not just having good matches for women; they're having good matches.
Well, they instituted the TNA Women's Knockout Tag titles, which I think it would not be surprising to see those come back. Like, as we film this, we are ahead of Slammiversary, and the last champions were Eric Young and ODB. They're both out there in the free agent market. It wouldn't shock me to see them just pop up on Slammiversary with the titles as if they never lost them or something, pretending that, like, it wouldn't shock me at all. And Impact has, in my opinion, the deepest roster of any brand as far as women go. I'm sure if WWE pulled all their talent together, they would. But as far as an individual brand, Impact just it has a lot of that. How much of that roster are you familiar with now, and how much of that have you gotten familiar with in the recent months or years?
Yeah, I've completely refamiliarized myself with the brand, and like I said, it's very exciting. It's this homegrown talent. There's a good mix. There's a lot of people that were not known and now are named, and the women's division is growing, or the knockouts are growing fast.
Yeah, I love the addition of Deonna Purrazzo and Kylie Ray. I think Kiera Hogan is way better than anyone realizes. Tasha Steele's signing. Like, they just keep adding really, really good names. And they, as we mentioned, they lost you pretty early in your, well, I don't want to say early in your career, because you had already been at it for years. It's just you were so young. I think it surprised so many people. How did that conversation go when you told them that you were going to wrap up your career?
Well, management was really shifting at that time, roughly around late 2010, 2011. And I don't believe I was really the focus of anybody in the creative team storylines. Like, things are really fizzling out, and I don't remember there being much pushback. If there was, I already had my mind made up. So I think it was pretty simple, I'll be honest.
And you had mentioned, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the biggest shock came from my family and fellow pro wrestlers.
I mean, yeah, you were so successful at such an early age. I mean, people thought, I remember when I saw it on wrestling news sites, I was like, that can't be true. Like, there's got to be something. Like, maybe she wants out of her deal. Maybe she wants this. But no, you have stuck to your retirement ever since, and you decided to come back now. What did you think of those management transitions? We talked, or I mentioned Hogan and Bischoff coming in. How did that sit with you? Because it did seem like after they came in, the emphasis on women was not quite what it was before.
No, it was, it was a very WWE mentality, and I had left that, and TNA had created something very different. And the focus wasn't on the knockouts anymore, and it didn't seem like it was going to go back that way anytime soon. So it was definitely part of my decision of leaving. It was not the TNA I had started with.
So during this period, over the last 9 years, almost 10 years, has anybody tried to get you back? Like, has anybody reached out?
Yeah, not every few years, I'd say. Someone may have given me a little poke or nod. You want to come back? And it hadn't been right. But I will say it's very humbling to even get that kind of request or, know that I'm still thought of, but it wasn't right at that time. But yeah, now it's different.
And it's not necessarily uncharted territory, because you had mentioned coming up with Becky Lynch. She took years and years and years off, and a lot of people don't even realize that she spent so many years away from wrestling, because she, like you, was so young when she did it, and then she came back, and then bam, immediately almost was ready to be thrust back into the WWE stage. In that time off, like, was there ever any time that you just hit a ring when you were like, let me see how I feel, do anything like that?
Yeah, funny you say that. Before I had my son, probably maybe 6 months before I got pregnant, I had, and I maybe had gone to 2 or 3 practices, and just being all or nothing, I had, I was doing something in an up and over manner, and I was a lot stronger than I used to be. And I went up and over and smashed my face on the steel post.
Oh no.
And yeah, and I definitely was like mildly concussed, and I had split the skin right on the bridge of my nose and 2 other places on my cheek, like the perfect outline of the rectangle when I had headbutted the steel post. And it was the day before I was supposed to go on this trip to St. Martin, so I had to drag my sorry butt to the Emerge, get my face glued, and then go on a plane with this like swollen, taped, glued mess on my face and like a mild concussion. And I thought at that time, I was like, well, if you ever needed a sign that you shouldn't go back, that is it. So I took another 3 years off.
You had developed that grown woman strength by then.
Oh my God, yes, for sure. I was like, oh God, I really overestimated my abilities, but we all make mistakes. And I had been lucky in my career. I'd never had any horrible injuries besides, the odd concussion and broken fingers and toes, but it's not that way. So.
And like we've said, you've lived a very fulfilling life since wrestling. Like you've done so much, like becoming a firefighter and having a child, and that's a life that a lot of people they don't even know if a female wrestler could have. We see, again, not to bring up Becky Lynch again, but she's off having a child too. Like how is that going to be balancing the wrestling life with having a child?
I just think I'm in such a different place than I was when I was 24. Like 10 years is a long time. And like you said, I've lived a lot of life in 10 years. One of the really attractive things is the way Impact is doing their filming. It works really well against my firefighting schedule, because I work shift work. And, it's a pretty short filming schedule, like 1 to 3 days a month. And my son is 2, and he's healthy and he's happy, and mama needs a break. So he's got a very good dad. And I have an excellent support system family-wise. I know he'd be well looked after. So it would just almost be like a little bit of me time to do my thing. Of course, I would miss him, but women are excellent at multitasking. So I feel like it would just be something I could work into my life.
And as we wrap up, I know that you had mentioned Impact Wrestling. The Toronto area has some pretty good independent wrestling too, between Smash and A1. Would you be interested in doing any independent shows, or would you strictly be trying to work like Impact or a schedule like that?
Hey, if I get a phone call or an email, I am up for anything. No one's called me, so.
Well, I was there for SummerSlam week last year, and my gosh, there were it felt like 20, 30 shows. It was a real display of Toronto talent all around the city, and it's good to see it explode like that in such a great city like that, and one that has been rich in wrestling. But as we finish up, let the people know where they can find you on social media. Let the people know where they can find your podcast.
Yeah, of course. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram with the same handle at Real Taylor Wilde, Wilde with an E. If you click the link in my social media, it will take you to my podcast. It's available on any major podcast platform. You can listen to it on Spotify. You can listen to it on Anchor, Google, Let me just pull up the link here because it's not that simple. You can find it on anchor.fm/Wilde On. And the podcast is called Wilde On with yours truly, Taylor Wilde. And we get Wilde on Wednesdays. Every week there's a new episode.
Taylor, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Hopefully next time I'm in Toronto, we can have you in studio for an interview because always love doing that. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Until next time, guys, we're out.